The second half of life. A Jungian perspective. There comes a moment in life when something quiet but profound begins to change. For years, we move forward with clear goals: education, career, relationships, achievement. We build a life outwardly. But somewhere in our 40s or 50s, many people begin to feel a strange unease. The things that once seemed so important suddenly feel insufficient. Success does not feel as satisfying. Ambitions lose their intensity. And an unsettling question begins to emerge: is this all there is? This moment marks the beginning of what the psychologist Carl Jung called the second half of life. And according to Jung, the tragedy of modern people is that we enter this stage completely unprepared. The program of the first half of life. The early decades of life follow a very clear program. From childhood onward, we are trained to move outward into the world. We are taught to become independent, to achieve, to compete, to prove ourselves. We pursue education, build careers, form relationships, and establish our place in society. This outward expansion is natural and necessary. In fact, Jung believed that focusing on external achievement during youth is psychologically healthy. The young person must develop strength in the world. They must discover their abilities and build a stable identity. Without this stage, the personality cannot properly form. But the problem arises when we assume that this same strategy should guide our entire life. Because what works in the first half of life does not work in the second, when the old strategy stops working. For many people, the middle years bring a crisis. They may already have everything they once wanted: a career, a family, status, material security, yet something still feels incomplete. At this stage, people often try to solve the discomfort by doubling down on the same pursuits: more money, more success, more recognition. But the satisfaction these goals once provided begins to fade. Why? Because according to Jung, the goal of life begins to change. The task is no longer expansion, the task becomes meaning, the turn inward. The second half of life requires a shift in direction. Instead of moving outward into the world, we must begin moving inward into ourselves. This inward turn is something many people resist. Modern culture celebrates youth, it glorifies ambition, speed, and outward success. But psychological maturity requires something different. It requires reflection, self-examination, solitude, the deeper exploration of one's inner world. The problem is that many people never learn how to do this. So when the call to turn inward arises, they feel lost. The mask we wear. One obstacle to inner development is what Jung called the persona. The persona is the social mask we wear in order to function in society. It includes our job titles, our roles, our public identity, our reputation. During the first half of life, this mask is extremely useful. It allows us to operate effectively in the world. But as we grow older, many people begin to realize something unsettling. They have spent decades strengthening their social identity without ever discovering their deeper self. Their entire personality becomes fused with their role: the successful executive, the respected professional, the admired public figure. But behind the mask, they may feel strangely empty. Because the persona is only a surface identity, and in the second half of life, the deeper self begins demanding attention, the unlived life. Jung believed that each person carries within them many potentials that never fully develop: hidden interests, creative impulses, emotional depths, paths not taken. These neglected possibilities form what some psychologists call the unlived life. When we are young, we often suppress parts of ourselves in order to fit into society. We follow expectations, we choose practical careers, we adopt identities that bring approval, but the parts of ourselves that were ignored do not disappear. They remain within us, waiting. And as we grow older, they begin to make themselves known. Sometimes this appears as regret, sometimes as restlessness, sometimes as a longing for something we cannot quite name. The task of the second half of life is to reconnect with these forgotten aspects of ourselves, to explore the parts of our personality that were never fully lived, the search for wisdom. Another shift that must occur involves our relationship to knowledge. During youth, knowledge is often pursued for practical reasons. We learn skills, we accumulate information, we develop expertise. But later in life, knowledge can take on a deeper purpose: the pursuit of wisdom. Wisdom cannot be acquired the same way we acquire technical skills. It emerges from reflection, from experience, from thoughtful engagement with life. Time spent reading great works of philosophy, psychology, and literature can nourish this process. But perhaps the most important source of wisdom is self-understanding, the willingness to explore the depths of one's own mind. becoming a guide. In many traditional cultures, older individuals were valued as guardians of wisdom. They became mentors, teachers, advisors to the younger generation. Their life experience became a source of guidance for the community. But in modern societies, this role is often neglected. Instead of embracing wisdom, many older individuals feel pressured to compete with youth, to remain young, to chase the same goals as younger generations. But according to Jung, this struggle against the natural arc of life leads to psychological suffering. Because the second half of life demands a different role, not the role of the competitor, but the role of the guide, the midlife crisis. When the transition to the second half of life is resisted, it often manifests as what we call a midlife crisis. People attempt to recover their youth. They pursue impulsive relationships, they obsess over appearance, they make dramatic life changes without understanding the deeper psychological need behind them. These behaviors are not simply signs of vanity. They are attempts to escape the realization that life is moving into a new phase, but no one can outrun time. And the more desperately we try to remain young, the more painful the transition becomes, the question of death. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of the second half of life is the growing awareness of mortality. When we are young, death feels distant, but as we age, the reality of finitude becomes unavoidable. Many people respond to this awareness with fear. They become preoccupied with health anxieties. They attempt to deny aging altogether. But Jung suggested a different perspective. Instead of viewing death purely as an enemy, we might see it as a natural destination toward which life moves. This does not mean welcoming death prematurely. It means recognizing that life has a direction, a natural arc, and accepting this arc allows the later years of life to gain a deeper sense of purpose. The inner illumination. In youth, the energy of life flows outward, like the rising sun illuminating the world. But later in life, that same light begins to turn inward. The purpose becomes self-illumination, understanding one's own nature, integrating the many aspects of one's personality, discovering meaning beyond external success. Those who accept this transition often experience the second half of life as deeply fulfilling, not because it is easier, but because it is richer in depth and understanding. The final harvest. Life can be compared to a long journey. The early years are about exploration and expansion, but the later years are about harvesting the wisdom gained along the way. If we cling only to the goals of youth, we miss the deeper possibilities that come with maturity. But if we accept the natural transition of life, the second half can become a time of profound insight. A time when we discover who we truly are beneath the roles and expectations of society. A time when the outer achievements of life give way to inner understanding. And perhaps that is the hidden purpose of aging, not decline, but awakening to the deeper meaning of life itself.